What happens when a spoiled rich girl thinks she's above the law? Chloe Winters walked into court like it was her personal runway, filing her nails, rolling her eyes, completely disrespecting the judge. But what she didn't know? That same black judge held the power to destroy her entitled little world. In just minutes, his verdict flipped her life upside down. Arrogance met justice, and justice didn't blink. Want to know how it all went down? Keep watching, because it's worse than you think. Before we continue, let us know in the comment where you're watching from. Meet Chloe Winters. Born with a silver spoon in her mouth, she's the kind of rich girl who thinks rules are for other people. The daughter of a powerful business tycoon, Chloe never had to face real consequences. Private schools, luxury vacations, designer clothes, you name it, she had it. And with all that privilege came an attitude to match. She believed money could fix anything, and if it couldn't, her last name would. Chloe's world was built on entitlement. She was used to people saying yes to her even when she was wrong. She never heard the word no, and when she did, she treated it like an insult. Waiters, assistants, teachers, everyone was beneath her in her eyes. She wasn't mean, exactly. She just didn't care. Why would she? Life had always gone her way, but life had other plans. Now, picture a courtroom. It's nothing like the glamorous places Chloe is used to. No chandeliers, no velvet seats, just cold, hard benches, dull walls, and the silent weight of judgment hanging in the air. For most people, it's a place where reality hits hard. But not for Chloe. She walked in like she owned the room, wearing designer sunglasses, a smug smile, and an attitude louder than her expensive heels clicking on the floor. She was in court for a serious charge, reckless driving that had injured someone. But to her, it was just an inconvenience. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't even embarrassed. In fact, she treated the whole thing like a minor annoyance. After all, her family had paid off worse problems before. Why would this be any different? And sitting at the front of the courtroom, Judge Marcus Bennett, a man who didn't need to raise his voice to command respect. Tall, dignified, with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through people. Judge Bennett had built his reputation on fairness, integrity, and an unwavering belief in justice. He wasn't impressed by wealth or status. In his courtroom, everyone was equal. But Chloe didn't get the memo. She slouched in her seat, pulled out a nail file, and started fixing her nails like she was at a spa, not a courtroom. She didn't care who was watching. She didn't even glance at Judge Bennett. To her, he was just another person she could ignore. But Judge Bennett noticed her. Oh, he noticed everything. While Chloe filed her nails, Judge Bennett observed her with a quiet intensity. He saw more than her expensive clothes and dismissive attitude. He saw someone who had never been held accountable, someone who thought she was untouchable. The courtroom was filled with people, lawyers, clerks, even members of the public, all watching this unfold. Whispers floated around, but Chloe didn't care. She was too busy acting like none of it mattered. But it did matter, and soon she'd realize just how much. Now, the stage was set. Chloe, the entitled rich girl who thought she was above the law, and Judge Bennett, the man who was about to prove her very, very wrong. The courtroom was filled with tension, even if Chloe Winters couldn't feel it. She lounged in her chair, lazily filing her nails like she was waiting for her spa appointment, not standing trial for reckless driving that had seriously injured an innocent person. Her lawyer whispered urgently in her ear, but she just rolled her eyes and waved him off, her arrogance on full display. Judge Marcus Bennett watched her quietly from the bench. His face was calm, but his eyes, sharp, observant. He had seen all types walk through his courtroom doors, criminals, victims, the privileged, the desperate. But Chloe was something different. She wasn't just entitled, she was oblivious to the weight of her actions. To her, this wasn't a courtroom. It was just another inconvenience she'd charm or buy her way out of. "Miss Winters," Judge Bennett finally spoke, his deep voice echoing through the silent room. Chloe didn't even flinch. She glanced up briefly, then went right back to her nails. A faint chuckle escaped from the back of the courtroom. "Is this amusing to you, Miss Winters?" the judge asked, his tone still controlled but carrying a quiet authority that made even the most seasoned lawyers sit up straighter. Chloe sighed dramatically. "I mean, it's just a traffic thing, right? Why are we being so dramatic?" The courtroom went dead silent. Her lawyer looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. The victim's family, seated quietly on the side, clenched their jaws, their faces a mix of disbelief and rage. Chloe's words weren't just offensive, they were a slap in the face to everyone who had been affected by her recklessness. Judge Bennett leaned forward slightly. His face didn't change, but his voice dropped to a tone that made the hairs on the back of people's necks stand up. "Miss Winters, you are in this courtroom because your traffic thing put another human being in the hospital, a person whose life may never be the same because of your choices. And you sit there, filing your nails, as if none of it matters." Chloe shrugged. "My dad's handling it. We've got lawyers for this stuff." You could hear a pin drop. Judge Bennett took a slow breath. "Miss Winters, do you think your father's money excuses you from responsibility?" Chloe smirked, tilting her head like she was being asked if she preferred sparkling or still water. "I think it fixes most problems." That was the moment everything shifted. Judge Bennett didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calmness was more powerful than any shout. "Let me make something very clear to you," he said slowly, each word landing like a gavel strike. "In this courtroom, your last name, your money, your entitlement, they mean nothing. What matters here is accountability. And you, Miss Winters, are about to learn what that word really means." Chloe's smile faded, just a little. The judge then turned his attention to the facts of the case, reading out the details with precision. The reckless speeding, the injuries caused, the attempts to cover it up with legal loopholes. As he spoke, Chloe's confidence wavered slightly. Not much, but enough for people to notice. Her lawyer tried to intervene, stammering about character references and Chloe's bright future. But Judge Bennett held up a hand to silence him. "This isn't about her future," he said firmly. "It's about the future she stole from someone else." Chloe's face finally showed something new, not fear, exactly, but confusion, like she couldn't believe this was happening to her. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. People like her didn't get scolded in public. They didn't face consequences. They paid fines, made donations, and moved on. But not today. Judge Bennett wasn't done. He leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with Chloe. "You walked into my courtroom like it was your personal stage, treating this process, and the people you hurt, as background noise. But here's the truth. The law doesn't care about your status, and neither do I." For the first time, Chloe put her nail file down. The tension in the room was so thick you could feel it. The whispers had stopped. Everyone was just watching, waiting. The spoiled, rich girl who thought she was untouchable was finally starting to realize she wasn't. And Judge Bennett wasn't finished yet. "Miss Winters," he said, his voice as steady as ever, "you've spent your life believing consequences are optional. Today, you'll learn they're not." The courtroom was silent. Chloe Winters sat frozen, her nail file abandoned on the desk beside her. For the first time, the weight of Judge Bennett's words seemed to land. heavy, undeniable, and completely foreign to someone who had never been held accountable for anything in her life. Judge Bennett leaned back slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "You've spent your life hiding behind your family's wealth, Miss Winters, but money doesn't change the truth. And today, the truth is staring you right in the face." Chloe's smugness was gone. No more eye rolls, no more dramatic sighs, just a flicker of realization, a spark of fear creeping into her carefully constructed facade. But it was too late. The judge wasn't finished. "Let's talk about accountability," he continued, his voice steady and sharp, "because you clearly have no idea what that means." Chloe's lawyer tried to interrupt, stumbling over legal jargon, desperately attempting to shift the focus, but Judge Bennett raised his hand, cutting him off with a simple gesture that spoke volumes. His courtroom, his rules. "You may be used to people cleaning up your messes, Miss Winters," Judge Bennett said, his tone cold but controlled. "But this isn't your father's office or your family's dinner table. This is a court of law." Chloe shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her confidence unraveling thread by thread. Judge Bennett began outlining the details of the case, his words as precise as a surgeon's scalpel. He spoke of the reckless driving, the victim's injuries, and the permanent damage Chloe had caused. The victim's family sat quietly, their faces etched with pain, their eyes filled with silent pleas for justice. "You treated this courtroom like a joke, just like you treated the lives of the people you hurt," the judge continued. "But the joke is over." Chloe's face grew pale. For the first time in her life, she couldn't charm her way out, couldn't flash a smile and expect forgiveness. This was real. This was happening. Then, Judge Bennett did something unexpected. He leaned forward, his voice softer, but somehow even more powerful. "Do you know what true privilege is, Miss Winters? It's not money. It's the luxury of never having to face the consequences of your actions until now." Chloe's breathing grew shallow, her eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape that didn't exist. Judge Bennett's next words hit harder than any sentence could. "You've spent your entire life believing you're above everyone else, but today you'll learn that the law doesn't care about your privilege, and neither do I." The courtroom remained silent, every word hanging in the air like a weight too heavy to lift. "Therefore," Judge Bennett said, his voice firm and unyielding, "I find you guilty." The words echoed like a thunderclap. Chloe's mouth opened slightly, as if she wanted to protest, but no words came out. She wasn't used to losing. She wasn't used to being powerless. But she was now. Judge Bennett wasn't done. "Your sentence will not just be a punishment. It will be an education," he declared. "You will serve community service, not in some cushy office, but working with the very people you've spent your life looking down on. You'll see what real life looks like beyond your bubble of privilege." Chloe's face crumpled, her eyes filling with tears, but these weren't the tears of regret. Not yet. They were the tears of someone who realized their life was about to change in ways they couldn't control. "And let me be clear," Judge Bennett added, leaning forward once more, "this isn't about revenge. It's about responsibility." The courtroom erupted in whispers, the tension finally breaking like a dam. Chloe's lawyer put a comforting hand on her shoulder, but it didn't help. Nothing could help. Because for the first time in her life, Chloe Winters was facing the one thing her money couldn't fix, the truth. But Judge Bennett had one final word. "You will also attend mandatory victim impact panels. You will listen to stories from people whose lives were torn apart by reckless behavior. And you will sit there, Miss Winters, without your phone, without your distractions, and you will hear every word." Chloe's tears spilled over now, streaking down her perfectly made-up face. The courtroom watched silently, not with pity, but with the satisfaction that justice was finally being served. But Judge Bennett wasn't done yet. "You will write a formal letter of apology to the victim and their family. Not something crafted by your lawyer, but your own words. You'll reflect on the harm you've caused, not just the inconvenience it's brought to your life." Chloe's shoulders slumped. The reality of it all was sinking in. No shortcuts, no easy way out. Judge Bennett continued. "And for the next 12 months, you will report to a probation officer, someone who will ensure you're fulfilling every part of this sentence. No skipping days, no excuses." Chloe's lawyer whispered something in her ear, probably urging her to respond, but Chloe just stared straight ahead. She couldn't process it. She wasn't used to consequences being real. Her mind raced, filled with flashes of her past, parties, luxury vacations, laughing without a care in the world. All of it seemed distant now, as if it belonged to someone else. She realized that the world she knew had crumbled in a matter of minutes. The victim's family sat quietly, holding hands, tears brimming in their eyes, not tears of satisfaction, but of relief. For them, this wasn't about revenge either. It was about being seen, heard, and knowing that justice wasn't just a word on paper. Judge Bennett leaned back in his chair, his voice softer, but just as firm. "I hope this experience teaches you something no amount of money ever could. Humility." The final words hit harder than any gavel. The courtroom sat in stunned silence, everyone feeling the gravity of what had just happened. As the bailiff approached to finalize the paperwork, Chloe wiped her tears, realizing that this was just the beginning of a lesson she'd never forget. Chloe Winters thought the nightmare was over when Judge Bennett delivered her sentence. But what she did not realize was that the true twist in her story was just beginning. Weeks later, Chloe found herself standing outside a rundown community center, far from the glossy skyscrapers and designer boutiques she was used to. Her community service had started, not the comfortable charity gala volunteering she expected, but real back-breaking work. No red carpets, no photographers, just her, a broom, and a room filled with people who did not care about her last name. At first, Chloe treated it like a temporary inconvenience. She showed up late, complained about everything, and kept her distance from everyone. She wore oversized sunglasses to hide her face, acting as though she was too important to be there. But the more time she spent there, the more cracks started to show in her perfect, polished image. She met people with stories far more tragic than hers. People who had lost everything but still carried themselves with more dignity than she ever had. She scrubbed floors next to a woman named Maria, who had been homeless after escaping an abusive relationship, and packed food boxes with Jamal, a teenager who had lost his parents in a car accident. Their resilience unsettled her because, for the first time, Chloe realized that strength had nothing to do with money or status. It came from surviving, from facing hardships she had never even imagined. One day, while cleaning the dusty floors, Chloe overheard a familiar name during a conversation between two staff members. They were talking about Judge Bennett. Curious, and still harboring resentment, she listened in. "Did you hear about Judge Bennett's past?" one of them whispered. "His son was killed by a reckless driver years ago." "That's why he's so strict about these cases." Chloe froze. She felt like the floor had been pulled out from under her. The man who had sentenced her, the man she had dismissed with her arrogance, had lived through the very pain she had caused someone else. Suddenly, everything made sense. His stern eyes, his unwavering tone, the weight behind his words. It wasn't just about the law. It was personal. But the twist didn't end there. Chloe's curiosity turned into obsession. She looked into Judge Bennett's past, reading articles and court records. What she found shocked her even more. The driver responsible for Judge Bennett's son's death? A wealthy young woman, just like her. Someone who had walked away with a slap on the wrist because of her family's influence. The parallels hit her like a punch to the gut. She wasn't just another spoiled rich kid anymore. She was a reflection of the very system that had failed Judge Bennett's family. And yet, he had not treated her with cruelty. His sternness had been rooted in justice, not revenge. He wanted to break the cycle, to do what the system had failed to do for his own son, hold someone accountable, regardless of their last name. Chloe's entire perspective shifted. For the first time in her life, she felt something she never expected. Guilt. Real, heavy guilt. Not the shallow regret she felt when she got caught doing something wrong. This was different. This was the weight of understanding, the realization that her actions had consequences far beyond what she could see. She couldn't sleep. Nights were restless, filled with flashes of the victim's face, the haunting silence in the courtroom, Judge Bennett's words echoing in her mind. Accountability isn't optional. Chloe's court-mandated letter of apology became more than just an obligation. She poured her heart into it, not because she was forced to, but because she needed to. She apologized to the victim's family, not with empty words, but with genuine remorse. She acknowledged the pain she had caused, the arrogance she had displayed, and the lessons she had been too blind to learn before. But she also wrote another letter, one she wasn't required to write. To Judge Bennett, she thanked him for teaching her a lesson no one else had dared to teach her. She told him she finally understood what accountability meant, not just in the eyes of the law, but in the eyes of humanity. She admitted that she had been blind to her privilege and that his verdict had opened her eyes. She wrote about the people she had met, the stories that had touched her, and how those stories had changed her view of the world. Weeks later, she received a simple note in return. Accountability is the first step. What you do next defines who you truly are. Those words stayed with Chloe for the rest of her life. She completed her community service with a different attitude. She arrived early, stayed late, and did every task without complaint. She even returned to volunteer after her sentence was over, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Years later, Chloe stood on a small stage at that same community center. She wasn't there as a volunteer fulfilling a requirement. She was there to speak, to share her story with others who thought their mistakes defined them forever. She spoke about privilege, about change, about how the harshest lessons could become the most meaningful ones. And somewhere in the back of the room, Judge Bennett watched silently, his face unreadable, but his heart knowing that justice had done more than punish Chloe Winters. It had transformed her. Because sometimes the real verdict isn't delivered in a courtroom. It's delivered in the quiet moments when you're left alone with the truth. Years passed, but Chloe Winters never forgot the day Judge Bennett changed her life. What started as a courtroom humiliation had become the turning point she never saw coming. After completing her community service, Chloe did not just walk away. She kept volunteering at the same community center, not because it was court-mandated, but because something inside her had shifted. The girl who once believed the world revolved around her had learned the value of humility, compassion, and genuine human connection. Chloe enrolled in college again, this time choosing social work over business. Her father had scoffed at the idea, dismissing it as a phase, but Chloe was determined. She was no longer interested in living in the shadow of her family's wealth. She wanted to create her own legacy, one that was not defined by privilege or entitlement. She started small, organizing food drives and mentoring at-risk youth. Every day she was surrounded by people who faced real struggles, people who fought battles she had once been too blind to see. And with every story she heard, every life she touched, she felt a deeper connection to the world she used to ignore. But the true test of her growth came when she crossed paths with someone who reminded her of her former self, a young woman named Ava, arrogant, dismissive, convinced that money could buy her way out of anything. Ava had been sentenced to community service after a reckless driving incident. Much like Chloe's own past, Chloe saw herself in Ava's smug expression, in the way she rolled her eyes during orientation, treating it all like a joke. But instead of judging her, Chloe did something different. She approached Ava, shared her own story, and talked about the lessons she had learned the hard way. At first, Ava resisted, just like Chloe had resisted Judge Bennett's words. She mocked the tasks, avoided responsibilities, and treated everyone with the same cold indifference Chloe had once mastered. But over time, Ava's walls began to crumble. She listened, she learned, and for the first time, Chloe realized that her past mistakes had given her the power to help others find their own path to redemption. One day, while cleaning out old files at the community center, Chloe stumbled upon a letter she had written years ago, the letter she had sent to Judge Bennett after her sentence. She smiled, remembering the fear, guilt, and hope she had poured into those words. It felt like a lifetime ago. Without thinking twice, she decided to write to him again. "Dear Judge Bennett, it's been years since I stood in your courtroom, a person blinded by privilege and ignorance. Your verdict did more than sentence me to community service. It sentenced me to self-discovery, growth, and, eventually, purpose. I wanted to thank you, not just for holding me accountable, but for believing I could change. I have dedicated my life to helping others find the same path you helped me discover. Your words never left me, and I hope this letter reaches you so you know the impact you made. With gratitude, Chloe Winters." Weeks later, she received a reply. "Dear Chloe, I remember you well. It's rare to see such growth and reflection. The law can punish, but true change comes from within. You've done more than redeem yourself. You've become a voice for those who needed someone to believe in them. That is the real verdict. Keep going. The world needs more people like you. With respect, Judge Bennett." Chloe held the letter close, tears filling her eyes. It was not just a piece of paper. It was closure. It was proof that people could change, that mistakes did not have to define a person's future. Years later, Chloe opened her own nonprofit organization dedicated to helping young people who had fallen through the cracks of the justice system. She named it Second Verdict, because as she had learned, sometimes the first verdict comes from a judge, but the second one comes from within. At the grand opening, standing in front of a crowd of supporters, volunteers, and young people she had mentored, Chloe gave a speech. "I used to believe that life was about what you owned, who you knew, and how much power you had. But I was wrong. Life is about the impact you make, the hearts you touch, and the lessons you learn from your mistakes. I was once someone who thought I was above the law, above consequences. But one man, a judge who refused to let me hide behind my privilege, showed me that accountability is not a punishment. It's a gift. We all make mistakes. But what matters is what we do after. That's our second verdict, and it's the most important one." The audience erupted in applause. But Chloe was not seeking validation. She was living proof that people could change if given the chance, and if they were brave enough to face the truth. After the event, as she mingled with the guests, Chloe felt a gentle hand on her shoulder. She turned around to see Judge Bennett standing there, older but with the same piercing eyes that had once seen right through her facade. "You did well, Chloe," he said with a small smile. For a moment, she was speechless. Then she smiled back, her heart full. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." Judge Bennett nodded, his eyes reflecting both pride and quiet satisfaction. "You took your second verdict seriously. That's all anyone can hope for." As he walked away, Chloe felt a deep sense of peace, not because she had been forgiven, but because she had forgiven herself. Years later, Chloe would tell her story countless times, to students, to struggling youth, to anyone who thought they were beyond redemption. She spoke not as a person who had fallen, but as someone who had learned how to rise. Because sometimes, the people who change our lives the most are the ones who refuse to let us stay the same. And sometimes, the harshest verdict is not the one delivered by a judge, but the one we give ourselves when we finally face the truth. Chloe's story is a reminder that life is not about the mistakes you make. It is about what you do after them. She went from being someone who thought she was above the rules to someone who helped rewrite them for others. Her journey was tough, filled with hard lessons and uncomfortable truths. But that is what growth looks like. It is messy, it is painful, and it is real. We often think that one bad decision defines us forever, but that is not true. The real definition of who we are comes from how we respond to those mistakes. Chloe's transformation was not about one courtroom verdict. It was about the choices she made after the verdict was delivered. That's the power we all have. The power to choose who we become, no matter what our past looks like. Think about your own life. Have you ever faced a moment where the truth hit you harder than you expected? A moment where you had to choose between staying the same or becoming better? Maybe it was a mistake you made, a lesson learned the hard way, or a moment when you realized you needed to change. What did you do next? So, what's your second verdict? What's the lesson you've learned from a mistake that changed you? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. If Chloe's journey inspired you, hit that like button and share this story with someone who might need to hear it. And do not forget to subscribe for more real, powerful stories that show how life's toughest moments can lead to the most unexpected transformations, because sometimes the biggest lessons come from the harshest truths. And the real verdict, it's the one you give yourself.